Firstly, so great to see that you are all excited and laughing and there's noise here in the club today. Welcome to the Women's Club for International Women's Day 2022. I hope you can hear me okay on the microphone. Yes, great. Yeah. I am Danielle Ashak, CEO of the Women's Club. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Where Gadigal women have been telling stories and sharing their experiences on these lands for tens of thousands of years. And today we join a very important tradition. Thank you all for coming in these strangest of times with floods, flash flooding, monsoon maybe, and making the effort to arrive here today in club and online to unite, network and mobilise meaningful change. While the first International Women's Day was celebrated in 1911 with more than 1 million people attending rallies campaigning for women's rights to end discrimination, Australia's first International Women's Day was held in 1928 in Sydney. Organised by the militant women's movement, women called for equal pay for equal work, an 8-hour working day for shop girls and paid leave. International Women's Day has become a time to reflect on progress, to call for change, and to celebrate the courage and determination of the women who have changed history and those who will advance gender equality into the future. It's an occasion to review how far women have come in the struggle for equality, peace, and development. Every day is International Women's Day here at the Women's Club, but we especially love this year's theme, Break the Bias, because it is the very reason we exist. For those of you who are new to the Women's Club, I'm just going to give you a bit of history as to how the Women's Club was founded. It was founded in 1901, in the same year as the Federation of Australia. But important to remember that in 1901, in that year of great celebration for the new century, women could not yet vote in New South Wales, nor had the Commonwealth Government legislated to allow women to vote at federal elections or indeed stand for election, all the rights we now take for granted. And of course, when they were granted the following year, these rights categorically excluded Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. Our founders, including feminist and suffragette Rose Scott, the physician, welfare worker and Sydney University graduate Dr. Mary Booth, and Louisa MacDonald, the innovative Scottish educationist who was appointed first principal of the Women's College, together with the University of Sydney, the Women's College and feminist groups, gathered over 100 women to establish the Women's Club. These women refused to allow the restrictions placed on them to stand in the way of equal access and opportunity. These women, specifically Rose Scott, played an integral role in winning the women's right to vote. And after 121 years, we haven't always been here, by the way, we moved here in the 80s, TWC continues to exist as an inclusive, diverse and safe forum for women to connect and network. And our aim going forward is to be a leading platform for female empowerment and progress across all disciplines, all ages, ethnicities and stages of life. Last year in November, Sarah Mansell, Sydney-based lawyer and founder, artistic director of Bankstown Poetry Slam, addressed the power of visibility on Meet the Artist, a digital in-conversation series with board director Augusta Supple. This was the highlight of the start of my journey here at TWC. I started on the 1st of October last year. For those of you that were attending that Zoom, you may have remembered that Sarah appeared on our Zoom screens with her baby, crying. She held her in her arms while she described her experiences as a Muslim woman of Lebanese background in Australia, breaking down barriers at a top law firm. Sarah also spoke about the power of spoken word and giving the opportunity and platform to people from marginalised and diverse backgrounds. Quote, they can share a little part of themselves, and that is really important to people who have been silenced in the media and silenced in society. We can't be what we can't see. And last month, we had the pleasure to welcome former UK Prime Minister, Lady Theresa May, at an executive board luncheon with women on boards. She made it clear that we need more women in executive leader positions, more women on boards, and more women in government. We need to work together to challenge the bias and empower the women around us to meet their potential. At the Women's Club, we believe in the power of visibility. I just want to draw your attention to two initiatives that we have. The Art Project is run by a committee of TWC members with the goal to acquire 10 pieces of artwork in 10 years from Australian female artists. And behind me is the most recent acquisition from Darwin-based artist Sarita King, called Ancestors, West Seas and Lake Eyre. I encourage you on your way out to explore the works that are on these walls by Layla Jeffries, Louise Allerton and Belinda Fox. The other initiative is Roosevelt Women's Writers Festival. It's a flagship event at TWC that celebrates the work of contemporary Australian women writers across fiction and non-fiction, print, performance and digital media. Established in 2013 and named after our founder, Rose Scott, the festival is the only festival in Australia dedicated to women writers. And this year's program will be delivered as a hybrid festival between 16th to the 18th of September. And there are program events that happen throughout the year, with the next one being on Tuesday, the 22nd of March. Our events offer a platform for top-thinking business and civil society leaders to discuss their views on a range of policy areas and topics, spanning arts and culture, social justice, technology, science, health, politics, media, and journalism. And we'll be continuing discussions like today on these issues impacting women in a special series called Women Now, both virtually and in person at the club throughout the year. And it's no better time that we do this with the years that we've had with COVID and an election coming our way. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our keynote speaker, Kat Dunn. I've got a very long bio here, but I'm just going to start with that Kat Dunn is a humanitarian capitalist with a passion for reimagining the way we live, work and connect in an increasingly decentralised world. She's the founder of advisory firm Avatrix, which just launched recently. And she's also got a background in TradeFi, SoFi, governance and cultural change, in particular corporate law, impact investment, startups and poverty alleviation. And in 2018, she was appointed the CEO of Ramin Australia, a microfinance organisation inspired by the work of Nobel Peace Prize winner, founder of Ramin Bank, Professor Muhammad Yunus. I'm going to leave everything else for you to say in your keynote speech. So please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Kat Dunn.
Morning, everyone. The theme of International Women's Day is break the bias. So it's inviting us to consider our biases explicit and unconscious and how they might be holding women and therefore humanity back. And one thing that I find is really helpful in opening us up to a discussion like this is getting really present in the body. So if you don't mind, I'm going to invite you to take a comfortable position in your seat. Adjust yourself if you need to. Make sure that your feet are planted nice and firmly on the floor. Noticing how your back is positioned on your chair. And when you're feeling ready, I just invite you to close your eyes and take a long, slow, deep breath in. And a long, slow exhale. And as you're doing so, just paying attention to your body. This beautiful body that has been holding you throughout your whole life. All the challenges, all the joys that it has witnessed and enabled you to witness. And as you're taking these gentle breaths within your body, I invite you to conjure the image of a woman that you admire. She may be you, she may be known to you, she may be someone that you admire from afar. On this International Women's Day, I invite you to share your appreciation of this figure, perhaps usually unsung. And as you do so, taking a moment to say thank you and appreciate yourself for carving out this space today. To listen, to be heard, share your voice, and most importantly, to be in community with one another. you take another long, slow, deep breath in, just notice what you're noticing in your body. It's okay if you have racing thoughts. It's okay if you're going through your to-do list. It's okay if you're feeling rather fatigued. I understand. And as you take a few more moments to yourself, in this spirit of appreciation, start to wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers. When you're feeling ready, I invite you to come back into the room and open your eyes. Welcome back to this beautiful architecture of the Women's Club. Before I start, I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land we gather today. And I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to say I appreciate any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the room. The idea I want to explore within Break the Bias is the modern Renaissance. It explains the foofy dress. And I actually feel it very fitting at the Women's Club, which, as you can see, is a space of beauty with the intent of bringing together women from all walks of life to nurture their interest in the arts, social justice, technology, science, and more. These are all ideas that the Renaissance accelerated. Over the next 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to share a bit about where I've come from, where I'm at now, and where I want to go, and why this symbolises the Renaissance. And then I'm going to explore how this relates to you, your communities, and humanity more broadly. So where have I come from? For a long time, whenever anybody asked me where I came from, I would notice this surge of anxiety in my body. It was a touchy subject. Our origins offer society an efficient way of sifting and sorting us into buckets of worthiness. Worthy, not worthy. Powerful, not powerful. Belongs, does not belong. Our place in the world. I was born in Manila in the Philippines, and I wouldn't know this until later, but I was born in a part of the country that other people called poor, and that this was a bad thing. Race, Asian, gender, woman, class, poor. Not a good trifecta. When I was 2 years old, my mum married my Aussie dad, and I ended up in a country town in Western Australia called Geraldton. Geraldton is 424 kilometres north of Perth, has a population of 30,000 people, and its primary industries are crayfishing, mining, farming. As an Asian girl growing up, yeah, you're laughing. As an Asian girl growing up in mostly white Australia during Pauline Hanson's maiden speech in 1997, let's just say the bias in that environment was, to put it diplomatically, brutal. I remember learning early on that I needed to lie about where I was born, because if I said Manila, I'd get caught up in these like long, drawn-out debates about how Australian I really was. So I learned that the truth was inefficient. As a woman, and it seems this wisdom is global, you learn pretty early on that you are prey. As prey, you get used to the ever-present low-level anxiety that is our body's state of rest. This anxiety is a constant reminder that you are never truly safe. Not from unsolicited comments, stares, or touch. It's just second nature from the moment you wake up to the moment you drift off to sleep. You are in a constant state of assessing threat and avoiding danger. This is dialed up when your skin is brown, your features are Asian, and your mannerisms betray your class. There's nothing quite like walking into a classroom of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan children in rural WA to give you a taste of how bias plays out in the real world. When I was little, people would often ask me what I wanted to be when I grow up, and I gave the standard answer: lawyer, doctor, engineer. But none of that was true. When you're 5 years old, you don't know much, but I knew this. As a poor brown girl, all I ever wanted to be when I grew up was a rich white man. The equation is pretty simple. If I was less poor, less brown, less girl, I would be more safe. Different 5-year-olds have different survival strategies, and mine was this: unreserved, social conformity. It was the most efficient solution to survive the ruthless, lawless jungle of primary school in country WA. If I minimised my differences and bought into their way of living, thinking, playing, then perhaps they will let me live another day. That's just the kind of self-talk you have as a kid. And so conform I did. But it wasn't sustainable, and it came at a cost. Growing up, the family business was in agricultural aviation and aerial firefighting. So because of this, I found myself at the age of 15 getting my student pilot license. And then a few years later, at the age of 20, I got my private pilot's license. A male pilot is called an aviator. A female pilot is called an aviatrix. The relevance of this trivia is going to become apparent in about 10 minutes. Eventually, I moved to Perth and went to law school at Murdoch University. I started off doing law arts, majoring in politics and philosophy. I loved it. I was good at it. It made me happy. And yet, by my second year of law school, I had switched from arts into commerce. The cost of internalizing conformity, which you have to understand, came from a desire to avoid bias and gain safety, was that I was swayed by peer pressure. The biggest regret of my career was listening to the people that told me that if I did an arts degree, I would become less employable. Law is a competitive environment. Perth is a small place. Everyone ranked each other on an invisible league table of worthiness based on how prestigious your job offers were. Prestige was defined in terms of starting salary. And instead of becoming a human rights lawyer, which was my secret ambition, I found myself accepting an offer with the Sydney office of Clayton Utz, a top-tier corporate law firm. The money was great. The status was better. And for about a day, I forgot that I was prey. Finally, I thought, now that I've made it, maybe they will leave me alone and I will be safe. So I moved to Sydney from Perth, and for the next decade, I learned a lot about how the world ran from the top down. I worked across structured capital markets, M&A, and private equity. Eventually, I ended up going in-house and rising the ranks at an ASX-listed fund manager. It was about in 2015 that I learned about the blockchain, distributed ledger technology, and the future of work. I really didn't understand what blockchain was, but I was attracted to the open source ethos which promoted transparency and community to tackle corruption and self-interest. It was the first time that I came across the concept of a decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, and I really liked it. Something inside of me knew that the centralized, hierarchical way of operating that made a handful of people a lot of money was the same operating system that made a lot of other people feel unsafe. I was one of those people with a lot of money. At 32 years old, I found myself on the senior leadership team of an ASX-listed company in a high-profile role 2 rungs below the CEO. And yet I felt this spiritual dissonance. I thought that once I broke the bias of being a woman, being non-white, being from the country, being poor, that I would finally belong and be safe. But all I saw were other broken executives who were just as lost as I was when I was 5 years old. I learned the following things in that environment. Profit was everything. People were replaceable. Nepotism closes deals. Diversity was a branding play, and innovation was only allowed as long as it was theatre. People who rocked the boat were overlooked for promotion. Women who took maternity leave signalled low commitment to career. Unconscious bias wasn't a problem to be solved. It was necessary to preserve the social hierarchy. See, the company was a reflection of the schoolyard, which was a reflection of the dominant attitudes of the world. It was really scary connecting these dots, especially if your safety strategy was to conform. But after 3 decades of conforming, I realized that I had to grow up. I wasn't a kid anymore, and this wasn't the schoolyard. This is my life. And bias isn't going to go away if you pander to it. I realized that I was never going to feel safe in a system that wasn't designed to make people feel safe. It was designed to rank people into buckets of worthiness based on race, gender, and class. The people at the bottom work for the people at the top. And I had been in it long enough to know that power, wealth, and dignity were centralized for a select few, and the many had to fight amongst themselves to get access to whatever was left over. This reality stayed reality because it was baked into the incentives and promotion structures of the operating system of the company. People were valued based on how much money they made or made the company. So if you're on maternity leave, you cost the company money. Ranking people based on money made people act in ways that were dangerous for other people. This makes the operating system unsustainable. Because people who aren't valued, or worse, are devalued, feel humiliated. Humiliated people become enraged. And enraged people break humiliating systems. If this system, this humiliating way of organising, could create potent discontent within just one company, imagine the impact of this way of organising on the whole world. The cost of conformity isn't just the collapse of my sanity, it's the collapse of society. So I stopped conforming and started thinking about how I could make a contribution with my life, it being the only one I have. So in 2017, I quit my job without one to go to, and over the next 5 years, I went through somewhat of a personal renaissance, the revival of my interest in politics, philosophy, and human rights. During 2017, I started F Off, the Fear of Failure Forum, which is a movement to say F off to our fear of failure and grow our potential. And I also worked for IdeaPod, a social media platform for ideas that are going to advance humanity. It was during this year that I was headhunted to become the CEO of Grameen Australia, which is then an overseas aid fund with ambitions to become a local microfinance social business. Grameen Australia was the local replication of Grameen Bank, which started in Bangladesh by Professor Mohammed Yunus. It lends working capital to asset poor women entrepreneurs, mostly women, and alleviated poverty through self-employment. So this is called microfinance. Over the last 40 years, Grameen has issued over $30 billion to over 10 million people and has a repayment rate of 97% worldwide. And in 2006, Grameen Bank and Professor Yunus jointly won the Nobel Peace Prize, and in doing so, Grameen Bank became the first organisation in the world to win a Nobel Prize. So my mandate was to bring Grameen's program into Australia, which I did, and in 2020, I hired my successor and transitioned onto the board. After Grameen, I moved more and more towards impact investing, impact strategy, and thinking deeply about the problems that I see. I started joining boards that were about creating a paradigm shift. So from Grameen to Food Frontier, a think tank and industry accelerator for the alternative protein industry, creating a paradigm shift around how we choose and grow food. And Women for Election, a pan-partisan non-profit that's educating and inspiring more women to run for public office at all levels of politics. Having seen how society is organised from the top down and bottom up, I realised I had a unique perspective, a systems perspective. Surprisingly, I noticed there was a problem that was shared by both men and women, from the poorest of the poor to the big end of town. People, irrespective of race, gender, and class, feel like they aren't worthy, and they crave love and belonging. Our current systems aren't designed to make people feel safe, but perhaps they should be, because the only thing that's limiting us from changing anything is our imagination. The Renaissance was associated with great social change and took place from around the late 14th century to the 17th century. It impacted arts, politics, science, and literature. It gave rise to Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. The political conditions and social systems that gave rise to it were unstable, so it was not a popular movement, but it advanced humanity in profound ways. The Renaissance was a move away from the medieval era into the modern era. And it's at this point that I will describe where I am now. And it's fitting to explore this next chapter here at the Women's Club, which is a club founded by a group of women who refuse to allow the restrictions placed on them to stand in the way of their determination to fully participate in public life. This philosophy resonates with me deeply. The next chapter of my life started at around the end of last year when I became increasingly involved in something called DeFi. It stands for Decentralized Finance. And you need only remember the horror stories from the Royal Banking Commission to see how broken and out of touch our centralized institutions are. I took my experience with microfinance a step further. Imagine a system of finance that doesn't rely on centralized intermediaries like banks. Imagine distributing decision-making power through communities instead of hierarchies of people. I didn't have to imagine for long because such a system exists. Decentralized finance distributes a finance platform's ownership, decision-making power, and operations across the community of platform users, rather than a centralized few. My partner Mike and I talk about the pitfalls of centralization a lot. He has a background in social entrepreneurship and was building an NFT business in what is called Web3. We do a lot of work together, which is why I'm referencing him. Web3 is the name of the next version of the internet and refers to projects or communities that operate natively on a blockchain platform. An NFT is a non-fungible token, and I'll get to that in a minute. After my initial excitement towards blockchain and crypto in 2015, I became pretty cynical about it. Being a social entrepreneur, there were just too many stories of bad actors, Ponzi schemes, and crypto bros for me to truly be an evangelist. But after a while, I saw how DeFi and NFT businesses were helping young people in developing countries earn a dignified salary. So one of our examples, we've seen firsthand how a 20-year-old Filipino woman could pay for an eye operation, fund her family's tuition and the family household during COVID using this NFT technology. So I became increasingly excited by the possibility of transforming humiliating operating systems into dignified operating systems with the help of pioneering technologies like DeFi, NFTs, and Web3. Can you imagine the impact of distributed platforms on those who have been excluded by centralized, hierarchical systems? For example, the poorest of the poor, or women, or girls. So on the 22nd of the 2nd, 2022, I launched my impact advisory firm, Aviatrix. The female pilot symbolizes pioneering people and technology. It symbolizes breaking bias and barriers. In our current system, women struggle to attract funding. In 2020, only 2.3% of venture capital funding went to female founders. What if Web3 could unlock non-traditional avenues of capital for female founders? So one project that Aviatrix is helping to take off is the Angel Alliance NFT. So an NFT is a unique token. It functions as both a register of title to a piece or work of digital art, as well as a membership card for a global community of entrepreneurs and political women. So through NFTs, Angel Alliance is able to fund women-led ventures, and it also funds the non-profit Vital Voices that invest in women who are solving the world's greatest challenges, for example, gender-based violence or the climate crisis. Angel Alliance is naturally aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goal 5, gender equality, on which today we honour. And so you're starting to see that the advent of NFTs sees a convergence of art, technology, finance, politics, and culture. What does this remind you of? Perhaps a modern renaissance. Which leads me to discuss where I want to go. Blockchain-based communities are still in their infancy. This means that there are a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities. Its open source origins and the uptake of NFTs, especially amongst younger people, lends Web3 native companies to aligning with not only the UN Sustainable Development Goals in terms of alleviating poverty and reducing inequalities, but also the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Centralized authorities like governments may have ratified the UN Declaration of Human Rights, but they are far from being the floor upon which our nation states operate. So, if governments are merely elected representatives of the people, if you're lucky enough to live in a democracy, then why not in this new system skip the middleman and go straight to the source? Go straight to the people who delegate the governments their power. In moving more and more into this space, I'm advocating for all organisations built on decentralised platforms, if not all organisations, full stop, to pledge their support of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the Paris Agreement, as well as the UN SDGs. This is where the possibility of grassroots rather than top-down systems change becomes really exciting. Instead of a centralised hierarchical system that sifts and sorts people into buckets of worthiness based on race, gender and class, what about decentralised peer-to-peer networks that incentivise and reward people based on contributions to community? What I've learned from my time in this space is that the world and humanity is hurtling towards a decentralised universe. Decentralised finance, Web3, blockchain protocols and digital currencies are pioneering technologies that have the power to unleash new possibilities. Now, whether these are ultimately a force for good or not appears to be up to us to create. So, what does all of this mean for you? We are at a fork in the road. Like money or fire, technology is neutral. What matters is how you use it. If used with the intent to help people, decentralized technologies can emancipate us from the indignity of humiliating systems. Or it can turbocharge the self-interest that plagues our systems today. We're at a point in history where we will either destroy ourselves and our planet in a few decades' time by conforming to the way that things are now, or we can use technology for good and shift humanity towards a future that is free from suffering, humiliation, and injustice. A world where people are loved, belong, and feel worthy, not because they are useful, but because they are people. Article 1 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of community. Our current system does not live up to that. So what are we going to do to challenge that? In our neighbourhoods, in our companies, in our homes? As women, how will we refuse to allow the restrictions placed on us that stand in the way of our determination to fully participate in public life? And how are we supporting pioneering people and technologies that are trying to remedy the problems created by centralized hierarchical systems that just no longer work in our modern context of being a global village? How are we challenging humiliating ways of organising and supporting dignified ways of organising? The crazy thing is the UN Declaration of Human Rights is seen as many people as being aspirational. I actually think that they should just be the floor. A code of conduct that all of us, irrespective of race, gender and class and some other quality, should adopt as standard in how we treat one another. The theme today is break the bias. Our greatest bias is thinking that the world's greatest challenges are far too great for any one person to make a difference. And I'm here to tell you that's just not true. You know, we can all sign up to the UN Declaration of Human Rights today as individuals, not in our capacity as a nation state, but in our capacity as citizens of the world. Can you imagine what would happen if 7.5 billion people did this? Could it perhaps mean that in our lifetimes, we just might be able to affect grassroots-driven societal change? A modern renaissance fueled by these ideas of love, belonging, and inherent human worth. Could we make a reality the aspiration that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights? Instead of waiting for governments to act, why not just offer each other a safe place to realise our dreams? Not as powers that be, but as peers. Can you imagine a world in which our reason and conscience really do enable us to act towards one another in a spirit of community? I can. To me, that is a worthy vision indeed, and one that is worth dedicating the next chapter of my life. If nothing else, I hope that you are left with just one small step you can take to walk a small part of this journey alongside me and be part of a modern renaissance of human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We are going to get started with non-technical events. Please feel free. This is a kind of a formal kind of thing, so if you want to keep eating, you can keep drinking, keep that conversation alive. You will notice that there's only 3 of us on stage, and that's because unfortunately 2 of our panellists had to pull out yesterday. Dana Altuck, one of our newest members, tested positive to COVID, and she was very disappointed not to be here to join in this conversation, but I've told her that she will join us again in the future for an event. And Betty Lane Holland is one of our longest serving members, as also unwell, and that would have been a really great addition to this conversation, being the first female racehorse trainer, and at 95 years of age would have been a hoot on this stage. But both of them were taking rain checks, no pun intended. But anyway, I mean, we've got 2 fabulous panellists. We've got our keynote chat, and we've also got Angela Kwan, who is a TWC member, joined in 2014,
and elected to our board of directors in November 2018. I was going to hand over to Angela to give an intro, but I might just kind of. Okay. Oh, do you want to? Oh, no. Introduce yourself. So Angela's a lawyer by profession and currently pursuing entrepreneurial pursuits in technology and property. She's the co-founder of Catalyzer, a technology social enterprise supplying corporations with innovative workplace giving management and reporting software. And we've got here that Catalyze software is used by over 20,000 employees and have facilitated over 3 million in charitable donations for their corporate customers. There's a long bio there on the website. But do you want to give us a brief rundown on Catalyzer?
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'm really delighted to be able to speak at the club. I've been a member for a long time. Actually, Catalyzer was founded at the Women's Club. I have, as Danielle mentioned, and as a lot of people here today, I did law. I was a lawyer for a little while as part of my career journey. I practiced overseas for about 10 years and I came back to Australia around 2014. And at that time, I wanted a bit of a career change. I was looking at the technology sector, startups, and also my experience working in law. I think a lot of people do law to make a difference in the world. And one of the privileges of being a lawyer was to do pro bono and to be involved in the community. The problem I wanted to solve with technology was in all the organizations, big law firms, corporates that I worked with, there was real focus on corporate social responsibility and giving back to the community. There were opportunities for staff to volunteer, to fundraise, to support different projects within the community. But all this was done based on the passion of people. There were no tools to do this, so organising a bake sale or volunteering day was very, very difficult, especially to scale across a big organisation. And so when I came back in 2014, there was a lot of movement in the technology sector to do with crowdfunding and people being able to do online shopping. And I guess the concept was if corporates already giving technology was part of corporate life, corporate communications, we have these great tools for facilitating individuals to give or support causes, crowdfunding, etc. What if we mash those together, create a corporate tool so that each corporate could then promote the volunteering, community partnerships and fundraising that they were doing, and then have a portal that every staff member could log on, see what opportunities that they could do, and sign up in a very streamlined and consolidated way. And that's how Catalyzer was born. My co-founder and I, at that time, we were bootstrapping, and we actually sat at the Women's Club, various pockets. So this was our first office for the first few years of our life. And I think that connection with the club and being able to now grow the business over the 6 years. And so Catalyzer right now, we're working since Danielle mentioned those numbers. We've grown a little bit since then. We're now a global company, so we're now supporting about 50,000 users around the world. Some of the recent things that we've been able to do, and I think COVID has really seen, I think, a renaissance in corporate social responsibility. There is the ESG movement. I think in the past there was a lot of talk about corporates giving back. Now there's a lot of, I think, engagement from the workforce, a lot of women workers that want to make a difference. People want to change the world from the workplace. People don't want to have to choose between I want to be a human rights lawyer or I need to quit my job to join a charity. There should be an opportunity for us to change the world from whatever profession we're doing. And I think that's been really exciting to see charities also embrace that corporates have a partnership opportunities with charities, that charities provide values and impact and engagement for staff. And so over the last 6 years of building this company, and I think some really, really recent examples are with the Ukraine crisis going on and the floods that are happening in Queensland, seeing the last few days our ability to galvanise corporates to respond really quickly and fundraise, get their staff fundraising corporates to match those donations. So I think that's been a real privilege, and I think part of it is also the club and being, I think one of the things I heard from talking to some of you before this event and listening to Kat's speech was about storytelling and fellowship amongst women and how we wear many different hats. And I think being in the club has allowed me to wear many different hats. I started my business here. I've also learned how to play bridge here, and did fellowship with a lot of had an ability to engage with a lot of people from different walks of life, be inspired by women with many different backgrounds. And when I came back after 10 years away from Australia in 2014, I wasn't sure how I was going to fit in and find my place again. And I think the Women's Club and what it represents, and seeing all these new faces here today, I think the other message I heard from Kat was about transformation and continuous transformation and being brave to disrupt and kind of not accept the status quo. So I think these are themes and observations that I've tried to embrace in my career, and I think really looking forward to having this discussion and learning more about your stories and your journeys as well.
That was a really good springboard, and I'm going to take it to the next question, which I was reading recently, I think on the Women's Agenda, Diversity Council Australia, Lisa, and these who you're familiar with at Women for Election, warned recently that progress has been made towards equality, but they may prove fragile unless biases continue to be actively fought. Things have moved, but there are dark forces trying to dismantle progress all the time. It almost feels like women's equity as workers was not taken seriously, but now that they are, they're being attacked because they are a real threat to the status quo. Just bring that in there because you mentioned status quo. So I want to know, from your perspective, what are these dark forces that she's alluding to, and what structure needs to shift?
I think I alluded to some of the dark forces more diplomatically in my speech, but one thing that I find really peculiar is how we have this strange fiction. We're talking about economic participation, so let's look at this context of work. We have this weird fiction of work-life balance, which as a woman, you know it's just life, the things that happen in your life, and yet we've concocted these like financial, business, organizational phenomena that seems to exclude the reality of life. And that has ramifications globally, right? So as a woman, it seems like your work, your productive work, we define productivity in terms of money, value, GDP, that's categorized inside your like organization based on the hours that you do and the like GDP that you make the company. The company operates inside a society, and the society has children and schools and nurses, and it's interconnected. And for some strange reason, we don't have like the GDP of society being in the home and in the schools and all of the emotional labor that goes into holding our society up in times of things like crisis or war and famine. And so one of the strangest things that we don't talk about is like, why do we still have this thing about work-life balance? Isn't it just life, and how do we therefore organize the activities we do in society so that people can live good lives? And like part of that is raising children, and part of that is having work. And if we can't organize our way of working, creating value and doing things for money and food in the community in such a way that honors the ability of the community to actually survive another generation, then we're always going to have this structural inequality where such profound spiritual and emotional labor will always go unacknowledged. And so my question is, and I think startups are doing this better, and corporates, I think they're trying to at least look at this, but this 9 to 5 philosophy and like ranking people based on how many hours they spend at the workplace is like a relic of the past. Like you either deliver the product, service, or value, or you don't in the amount of time it takes to do that, and whatever that looks like ought to be supported. Otherwise, yeah, there's going to be unintended consequences. We know what happens when tired executives go home to tired families. And it's not just women that happens to. And when men go home tired and feel powerless, that's a problem.
You're mentioning about, I guess, our government leaders, the structures in government. Can you talk more about that?
So in the lower house, there's maybe 47 out of 151 members of parliament in the lower house. Women, that's around about 30%. That is not enough. Like if you've got over 50% of the population not being represented, you can see what the outcomes of that. They can't even get their own house in order. They can't even get their own house in order. The sexual harassment in Parliament House. So, I mean, I think that one effective way of just being able to do this practically is think about yourself. Like, think about your local, state, and federal electorate. And at Women for Election, we see that there are so many talented women that should absolutely have the capacity to run for public office, whether it's in their local council, whether it's at the state level or the government level. And that really needs to happen, because if it doesn't, then it's going to be more of the same. And if it's more of the same, then what's the other workaround? People are just going to start walking into alternative systems because the existing system is no longer fit for purpose. And that also has great consequences too.
And Angela, dark forces.
I actually want to think about it from a personal point of view. I think that a lot of the bias and the dark forces are within, and maybe that's some of our origin stories and how we were brought up as women, or the expectations around us. I think Kat really, when she was talking about her kind of migrant story, it really, I could really resonate with my own coming to Australia in the 80s. And I think a lot of the dark forces I feel are internal, that inertia, that fear. So I think as women, we are burdened or have a lot of expectations from our upbringing or from perceptions. And to really combat those dark forces, we need to empower ourselves to change that paradigm and to tell our stories and to challenge the status quo. And I think acknowledging the dark forces within that are holding us back, and then trying to take back that power by embracing that difference, the fact that we are going to be disruptive, the fact that it's our journeys and our kind of even career paths, the linear career path of the past in I guess a more male, traditional male profession. I think a lot of the conversations I've had with people here today is that we wear many different hats, and that should be a good thing. And leadership as a woman doesn't have to be a title or a CEO or you're the Prime Minister. We can all be leaders by reinventing the paradigm of what it means to be leadership. And I think part of fighting the dark forces is to, within ourselves and the limitations that we perceive or that have been projected upon us, and to really break those shackles and reinvent what leadership, what success means in a unique female way.
And that really resonates with me, because I think starting in my career, I've got a performance background, as well as I've always been career orientated. I think that's the strong matriarch in my family. And at the very beginning, I was told you can't coexist. Your performance hat and your career-minded hat cannot coexist. But I made it coexist. And that was the greatest difference, the point of difference for me when I entered my executive MBA, because no one else existed like that. And I think when young women are coming to me and asking, what's this advice? I'd say, find all those things that make you different, because that's your greatest advantage. They're not the things that you're cutting out of your CV. They're the things that make you stand out among everybody else. Yes. And I think that it's really important. We need to have a really diverse workforce. We're looking at agile teams more than ever after COVID. We need our workforce to be able to have these, to be multifaceted, to have all these skills and talents. I think it's a really important point to make. Moving on to, I guess, the finance and investment questions. So last night, when I was thinking through some questions, when I received the news that we were going to have a very different panel, I was both, I see opportunities and everything. So it was really great because I got to have both of you, social impact. We're talking about angel investors. We're talking about kind of these new financing initiatives that I've probably just learned about at the start of this year. So And when I was speaking with a member who's also a philanthropist, we're talking about philanthropy for women and the notion of women supporting women and the shift towards philanthropy that centers around providing financial support that is independent of men. Because most of, that we know is that this financial support has come from men's wealth and now women are creating their wealth. Women's philanthropy is gaining visibility and offering a transformative opportunity for the sector. I'm curious to hear both of your views about how this is playing out in the entrepreneur space and social impact. So maybe, Kat, what triggered you to join the Angel Alliance, and could you provide us with a bit more of a description about angel investment? What is it?
100%. So taking it a step back, sort of working in traditional corporate and then working in traditional charity, I had the ability to see that both were incomplete ways of thinking and deploying capital. Like in the charity world, the philanthropy as a way of funding projects is not sustainable. Like what happens when the money dries out? And business being profit only, if it doesn't look to solving social problems, growth for growth's sake is itself not sustainable. So you've got these two problems that are occurring. And so what's really fascinating in moving to the decentralized finance paradigm is that instead of looking to be funded to a centralized place, you're now looking to be funded laterally by your peers. So I think that, one example that struck me is when there's overseas aid funds giving like tide or philanthropic funding to, say, a central bank in East Africa. It might take 8 months for it to go through the process and then be deployed on the ground in Mozambique. Now you have a possibility of peer-to-peer aid happening around the world. Early example of this is Kiva. If some of you have heard about that microfinance platform where you can kind of invest one-to-one to somebody overseas and they are able to use this as working capital. The extension of that is now in the space that I mentioned before. What is angel investing? It is investing in a private company that wants to scale at a very early stage. So usually under sort of 100,000, they might just have an idea. They might have one or two people, but it's super early stage. In Australia, the angel investing industry is not as mature as you see in other countries. And around the world, angel investing typically is dominated by men. So 95% of all US angels and VCs are men-led VC companies. And so you have these statistics where it's like 2.3% of all VC funding was female entrepreneurs in 2020. So that's interesting because if innovation comes from different and original ideas, if because of unconscious bias and instructions that we've in today, if you're only getting a portion of your innovative ideas from one half of the population that identifies with a particular gender, that's a massive opportunity cost. And so why I was inspired to join Angel Alliance was that they are unlocking non-traditional avenues of capital from ordinary people. Like you and I, we buy clothes, dresses, we buy things. We pay money for them and we have the thing, which is water bottle or we don't really get any other benefit from it other than the utility of it. Angel Alliance gives ordinary people the ability to access something of value, and it could be a beautiful profile picture of a powerful woman. And they buy that. But instead of just having this consumable or collectible, it's a portal, an access point where their funds are actually used, their pool, to then grant $15,000 to at least 8 women companies a year. And also supports political causes, but then also gives them access to a community of people like us all around the world who are interested in networking with investors, entrepreneurs, politicians, and just talking to other peers who are experiencing similar challenges, whether it's in Nairobi or in New York. So that's why I think it's really powerful, the possibilities that can be unlocked in the decentralized space with non-fungible tokens or other such tokens, just to experiment with that way of contributing. And I don't call it giving because I think it's contributing.
And for you, women supporting women, in entrepreneur space? What does that mean? And I guess talking again about the investments and giving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the last 6 years, just my own journey, I've seen a lot of change, positive change in that space. I think firstly is the acknowledgement and the data that shows that there is this huge disparity, that it's recognised, it's not unspoken, it's recognised by everyone that women are very poorly represented in terms of being funded, being acknowledged and being supported as entrepreneurs. I think firstly there is recognition about that, but I think I'm also really excited by the fact that women are trying to solve the problems collectively rather than relying on governments or traditional institutions to solve those barriers. So in recent years, I've seen the growth of kind of women angel networks, women helping women, and coming up with very innovative ways to fund. So there's one network that I know of where traditional angel investing as a model is all about financial return, and it's all about evaluating businesses based on how much profit is going to come about. Some of the more innovative kind of women's-led movements I've seen is, for example, in the charity space, there's movements like 10 by 10 and the funding network, where it's taking that concept of Shark Tank, but we have charities that pitch at corporates, and corporates basically use this as a very engaging way for their staff, and you will get hundreds of thousands of dollars donated on one night. And I think what I really like about this model is that it leverages some of the systemic issues that are. So you get a room full of bankers and they're trying to outbid each other to be the top contributor. So I love the way that women are using, kind of turning that to our advantage and saying, okay, why don't we take this kind of animal instinct of men and executives trying to be the top dog and do it for a charitable cause. So I think that's very exciting to me, kind of women recognizing that there's these barriers and then disrupting, innovating, turning existing systems to our advantage and celebrating that.
Excellent. So we're nearing the end. So I've got two last questions. One is from the floor, and that's for Kat. How can you get those who don't understand these new decentralized technologies, how do you get them on board, especially when new tech can make most people nervous about using it and feel that it's beyond them?
Absolutely. I was this person, right? Like, I honestly, when I started learning about these technologies when I was a fund manager, it was exciting, but for me, conceptual. And so I spent a long time kind of just putting it to the side and being like, I'll deal with that later. And later happened to be 2021. And there's actually, I think what makes it exciting is when you see how translatable some of the concepts are to the world that we already know. So those of you who are in law and finance, you know how there can be some opaqueness created with our internal jargon, and I see the same in tech as well. One really easy way for me to start to understand these technologies is start to build a bit of trust in the people who are launching these things. When you have such far proximity from people who are involved in these technologies, it sometimes feels like it's beyond you. So what I did was I joined a community online called, and it's on the platform Discord. It's essentially a messenger chat platform, and I started listening to what some people were saying and talking to them and interacting with them and realizing there are very pragmatic ways for these new technologies to be used that I can have very easy access to. And when I realized that, for example, Angel Alliance is really just a club of people who put their money into a kitty and then vote on projects that they're going to fund. To me, I thought that was a really pragmatic way of making decisions. And the only difference between how we normally fund these projects was that instead of paying my money via check or electronic funds transfer, I bought a beautiful piece of digital art, and that was just my key. And it ended up kind of being very, I started to compose my understanding of his faith in very little chunks. Like I actually, I had a lot of imposter syndrome, and I also put not a lot of pressure on myself to get it right, and have had to be quite humble and just like ask a lot of people, what are these words that I should know that are really basic that I don't know? I've been in finance a long time, but I don't actually know what that is in your world. And I found that the best way to access these technologies and create some trust was coming in with a really a learner's mindset and just asking for help. Asking for help is like probably the biggest game changer for me, because I went from expert mindset to like total student. And as a student, I have just organically been involved in some of these opportunities, mostly as a way to work. So that's what I would encourage you to think like, by the way, no one knows anything about them. We're all learning together. Those people that have told you they're in the industry for 20 years are lying to you. They've only been in the industry for about a month or two. Just like, yeah, humility is something that we can all maybe just adopt and not be afraid of.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask for a question on a, to end on a hopeful note, and that's a really good way to end it. But also, what is a International Women's Day without some stats? So, gender pay gap, 13.8%, a drop from last year at 14.2%, and female employment is still at record lows. We're 70th in the world for women's economic participation, despite occupying the top slot for women's education. How are you both supporting women's economic participation? And to finish this International Women's Day, how can we work together as a community to bring us up from the 70th in the world?
I think it's also, I'm really surprised by how low we are in female participation, and I kind of wonder what is the definition of participation, and maybe we're not recognising women's economic contribution. It's maybe not a 9-to-5 job. It might be entrepreneurs that are not paying themselves to start businesses, mothers, carers. So I'm not sure if part of feeling so bad about these numbers is just the paradigm of how they're calculated and whose voice and whose contribution is not being recognised. I think the other note, I think, as women is that we are more adaptable at learning and wearing many different hats. And I think that's the opportunity for us, is to embrace and be at the forefront of being humble, not knowing everything and not being the system. Because of where we're on the outer, this is the opportunity for us to be on the frontier of change and to be the pioneers and not embrace the status quo. And I look at the club itself. We as a club are going through a cultural transformation and an operational transformation. And I think one of the things that I've loved about the club is that ability to change and grow and adapt is ageless. It doesn't matter how old you are, what your background is. Everyone has the capacity to learn and grow forever. And I think that's really exciting. As women, we can see these problems, but we can be part of the solution by embracing our own power to make a difference. And that ability to change, to grow, to learn is ageless and continual, and no one can take that away from us.
Whenever I hear these stats, there's one thing inside me that always feels uneasy, and we're constantly ranking each other on economic participation. And the conversations around economic participation, that's important because you need money to live, get that. But there's not enough of a conversation around the societal and community contribution that women for just millennia have remained their contributions have remained invisible. So my question is, how does society do we shift the mindset from ranking a woman based on her productivity, participation, as a proportion of the population, to her work in creating the next generation of humans? And so maybe that's something we can bring into our own biases, into our own homes, into our kind of compassion for ourselves when we're feeling guilty because we're not being productive, or we have to clean up in the home or look after our kids instead of doing all the time. I would invite a mindset shift to actually appreciating and being gentle with yourself if you're choosing not to aspire to that common way of sorting and sifting people based on worthiness. And I just want to applaud all of you women who made the effort to come here in torrential rains in the middle of a pandemic on International Women's Day, because you're showing that you're actually leading this movement by doing it, and you're showing up. So I understand you, your character, your spirit, and your dedication to the cause. So on this day, I want to acknowledge all of you and thank you so much to the Women's Club for continuing this conversation. And long might it actually shift us into a modern renaissance.
Thanks, Kat. A really wonderful way to finish. And Angela, thanks so much for joining me today on this stage, Women's Club for International Women's Day. Please join me in giving a applause.
Thank you very much. Where do I start with that? So, Kat, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think storytelling is so really very important, and as well, it's quite tough to do as well. I could almost smell the feeling of that playground, or the primary school. I saw the playground in Geraldton. But really, at the table I was sitting at, it generated a lot of conversation. The ideas that you gave to us, there's a lot of food for thought, and I think that's probably, I can say that across the other tables here today. For me, the idea of safety and this thing, I think that we can all resonate with that we seek safety, and unfortunately, for virtually everybody, it would be everyone, the structures are sort of so toxic that we always come across with the last thing we've ever achieved actually is safety. But the other idea is, of course, this one of renaissance. And I think, we are on a point of shifting, of change. And the Women's Club is, as Angela said, just on the precipice of transformational change, which is really very exciting. So thank you for speaking about that theme. And Angela, well, what can I say? Your startup, the concept of marrying corporate social responsibility with technology. And as we all know, technology, if you can't use it, is kind of useless. People won't engage, will they? So I think that's, an example of renaissance and a sort of modern company. And Daniel, thank you so much for your fantastic preview of the Women's Club history, and of course for facilitating a great discussion today. Thank you. I should just acknowledge the difficulties that we're in globally at the moment, and if there's any Ukrainian people of heritage in our audience today, our hearts go out to you at this time. As I said, there is a huge transformational change in the Women's Club. So I would really encourage you to take a look at our website, because we're having a very pointy, cutting-edge program that's facilitated by our CEO and programmed by our CEO, and we have many events that are open to the public. And that they're available both in club and also on Zoom. So I encourage you to look at our program and register for those events. And thank you. And thank you to our panel.